Okay, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. I'm back after a very, very stressful week, which I told my friends here about at length, and you don't have to hear about. Yay! But here we're today's topic is inheritance, and I think Morgan, I think you were the one who suggested it.
Oh,
But
was it really?
it's just a really, really good topic because it shows up in so many different contexts.
Mhm.
I mean, the things that occurred to me off the top of my head were this is like the entire plot of King Lear, right?
Mm.
Um, and the other thing that leapt into my mind when we were thinking about, inheritance and stories is the way that you always have the stories with the three sons, right? And there's always the first son's doing fine, the second son's doing okay, and the third son's got to go off to seek his fortunes, and that's where stories are made, right?
Right.
Um,
Well,
and
in every dynastic struggle ever.
yeah, yes, yes. Oh, the heir to the throne. Anybody? Anybody?
Lines of succession,
Yeah.
not just the throne, but in other, um, any house, any land holding, any title holding,
Mhm.
then you're going to have the lines of succession issues.
Yep.
Um,
And then of course you've got these really fascinating cases where there are things like the British Crown
mhm.
or the Japanese imperial crown, where you've got these really interesting gender-related twists that happen. I'm thinking, well, I'm thinking specifically about how Elizabeth became queen,
Yeah.
because there were no males in that generation. There were just no, like there were just no males in that generation. So
Right.
that was how she became queen, because there were no other male options, because the gender bias was there, but the boys weren't there.
Right.
Well, even if she had male cousins, though, it has to go down the line in
They
specific
had some
order.
male cousins, right, but they were not direct enough. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
had no
But
brothers.
it is actually quite complicated in how it works out. And
Actually, they changed it,
yeah,
about
they did.
12 years ago. They changed it to take gender out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that was actually a new thing, which I'm really glad they did.
Yeah.
So, um, uh, the other thing with the thing that I'm thinking of with the Japanese imperial crown is that the current heir has no heir, right? Like
Yeah.
the crown prince. There we go. The crown prince's wife has had one child, and it's a girl, and they're done. So that's been very complicated, and I don't, and everybody's kind of been flustered about it. That
Yeah.
when I talk to them, and I can't recall exactly what the current status of that is, but I know that they're looking around for, like, what should we do? Should we allow there to be an empress? Kind of, I mean, interesting, because in fact, some of the earliest rulers of Japan were empresses, right? Um, the male chauvinistic thing came in later. And it took charge really strongly, but it wasn't there from the beginning. So, and then of course the other thing that relates to inheritance with that um, is the importance of the idea of a hereditary line that goes directly back to the deity, the sun goddess. So, like, so yeah. So the Imperial Household Agency does all kinds of interesting things, like forbidding research to maintain the story that the Japanese imperial line is unbroken.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway,
Well, and then the for some reason you just made me flash on how the whole pattern of male inheritance dovetails with women,
mm-hmm.
social conventions about women and virginity and
Oh, yeah, yes. Gender
because
gender can't be extricated, I don't think, from at least from these discussions of, yeah, I just don't think it can be extricated.
yeah, unless you have a totally matrilineal society, because you usually can know who someone's mother is.
Which is why a lot of cultures do have matrilineal lines, family lines.
Mm-hmm.
But even if it's a patriarchy in terms of who's in charge of the house, and who owns the property.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about a lot, but certainly the Jewish line of succession
Mm-hmm.
in terms of family and who you are is matrilineal. Sort of.
Yeah.
I won't say it doesn't matter who your father is, but that's not traditionally. I mean, in
Right.
form, it doesn't matter which parent was Jewish to begin with. You're Jewish, but in conservative and Orthodox, certainly, it does matter. And if
Yeah.
you're not Jewish, then you've got to convert.
Right. In fact, I have a friend who is Jewish who married a Gentile woman, and she actually had to convert because he wanted his kids to be Jewish. So that was a very long and complex process, and it was very important to him that his kids be Jewish, and that's great, But it was like, wow, a lot of work to do because of the matrilineal thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
What I was going to say, whenever you have, so agrarian societies, right, often have this value of you have to have lots of children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're an agrarian society, who's going to be running the farm? Well, your children are the most obvious choice for who's going to work for you, right? Because you can make them work for you in return for food, right? And the more people you have working for you, the better your farm, the better your farm production is going to be. So you have that, but at the same time, you've got the fact that the farm can't be broken up into 12 pieces.
Right.
So it
can be once, but after a couple of generations.
Right. I mean, like if you own the entire land, right, you can divide it up a few times, but at a certain point, things start getting a little constricted. I mean, I think that there's a real tension there between the value of having a lot of children and the difficulty of actually deciding how to provide for those children when you die. Yeah. And of course, if they all continue to live on the farm and fine, but who's going to manage it? Is it going to be a free for all? And all that. So.
Yeah. There's other things, of course, that can be inherited, which would be property and monetary assets. And we were starting to talk about that before we went live.
Yep. Do it.
And that is also can be gender based, but it isn't always, and certainly under our current laws here, it's based on a number of things. The first thing is if you have a named beneficiary on an asset, then it doesn't matter whether or not you have a will, that person gets the asset.
Yeah.
After that, if there's a will, then it's distributed according to the will, whether it's money or property. But after that, if you don't have a will, then the state jumps in. And
Yeah.
it may vary from state to state, but basically they go and they find any living spouse, any living children, any living siblings or parents, and I don't remember exactly what order that is in, but
Yes.
spouse comes before children. And then the state will divide it up evenly. And if there are no family members, the state just gets it. I don't know what they do with it, but it's theirs. It's unclaimed. And yesterday, in preparation for this, or attempts to prepare for this, I came up with rules for the two countries that I have.
Cool.
Well, I've got Kanahar and then Ukandir, which came in and took over. So their rules are law. But then there's a clash between the way they do things and, of course, the way Kanahar does things, which is very much the way we do, just the same named beneficiaries. For business, it's a named partner, and then whatever goes with the will, and then the state distribution. But
So Kahar's most like us?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think a business goes pretty much the same way. A partner will inherit the business. In a Kandir, then the structure is house, is a house, and the head of the house doesn't actually own the house assets, the family assets.
Okay.
They may have personal things that they have, but if they die, the next in line becomes the head of the house, but the property continues to belong to the house. And so that's a difference. I was trying to figure out how those laws, because those laws have been imposed on.
Right.
How do you accommodate that? How do you try to determine who's the house? Is there a house, and can you arrange their family, view the family in that way, or do you need to just try to go by the original Kanahar rules, which is kind of tricky.
Yeah, that is tricky.
Yeah.
And that's going to be interesting. If there are people who leave the house, I mean, not the family, but they leave the house and they go and live somewhere on their own, and they have jobs outside and they make money from outside jobs, that is their money. But if they have no heirs, the money doesn't pass to the state. They're considered to still be a member of the house, and assets that would otherwise pass to the state pass back to the original house. So that's how they handle house members leaving the house. If you leave the family, that's a whole other thing that involves not just being disinherited, but ceasing to ever have been a member of the house. Which I didn't mean that to happen.
Yeah.
Just riding along, and the heir to the house said, I have to go home because otherwise they kick me out of the house and the family, and I never existed to them. And
you were like, oh, that's cool. I mean, kind of horrible.
Wait a minute. And some things you look at and you can say, okay, that doesn't make sense, I can change it. And some things are suddenly set in stone.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have
Because they feel really right within the context of the secondary world, right?
I'm sorry?
It can feel really right in the context of that secondary world.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's what did it, is it made sense to, if you're dealing with something as tight as a family that is a house, particularly in that situation where they rule the country,
Yeah.
you know, if you're just a jeweler and, well, just a jeweler, that's a real skill, but you don't rule any other house, you don't have own property that you are in charge of other people's lives outside the house, it's less of an issue, though the law says what the law says.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't thought much about the general inheritance rules in my world, but the specifics of the inheritance of the leadership, that I've thought through a ton, right? I think it's kind of worth mentioning because one of the things that I was trying to do was ask the question, how does a person who's not fit get selected as the next ruler, right? In particular, there was this question of, if it's just plain inheritance, you can kind of go, well, we know this guy's not okay, but he's the next in line, right? The reason why this question was always so fascinating to me was because they talk about rulers who are unfit. Rulers are unfit in stories a lot.
Right? Oh, yeah.
They are often unfit. Well, and so you're like, well, how did that happen, right? So there's, so there's the straightforward thing, but so in Varan world, you don't actually. It's this bizarre combination, and I honestly don't know how I came up with it initially. I was like, this thing happens and blah and blah and and I know why now, like I know what the basis was for why it was not an inheritance, just a strict inheritance system. But anyway, so what happens is that you have this ruler and then you have this process where the 12 great families each put up their top young man, and then they all go off against each other in this competition to become the heir to the throne. And they're voted on, but they're voted on by the cabinet, which is this group of people, including the current ruler who has just succeeded to the throne. So, yeah, so it was let me tell you, it took a whole novel for me to work this out. On the other hand, it ended up being very interesting, right? I mean, to explore like how somebody unfit would become a ruler and whether it would be possible to prevent them from becoming ruler and why or why not, right? So anyway, there are lots of ways that you can organize it, I guess, is one of the things I'm trying to say. When you have something that's heritable, people compete with one another for inheritance quite a bit, I get the sense. Which is why wills are important. I mean, gosh, it just struck me. There are these very specific stories that are entirely driven by the presence or absence of a will. And I'm thinking specifically of the Aristocats and also Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
I don't remember how that one went. I mean, I've seen it. I just don't remember the inheritance action.
So the key question with the will was, who owns Toontown?
Right.
Because um, there was the guy who had established Toontown, and he died. And then nobody knew what had become of his will, and so Toontown was going to be, I think, broken up. And it was a question of what, and rumor had it that the will said that Toontown was going to be inherited by the Toons, right? So that they would own their own town, effectively. Right? But yeah, that was actually kind of an important. I mean, there was so much going on in that movie, right?
Oh yeah.
But it actually was an inheritance premise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the lawyer we finally found to help us out with it, the problem of getting my husband, his sister, named as administrator, which is another thing. If you don't have power of attorney and you're not named as executor in the will, then somebody's got to be in charge of distributing the estate. But the lawyer told me that he had a client who had $49 million, and deliberately he had no heirs and no will, and apparently he thought somehow that he could take $49 million with him. The lawyer hasn't been able to locate a will. He does, or actual legitimate heirs, but he does have people coming out of the woodwork with wills that they found somewhere, secreted away, and that they had been entrusted with. So that's another thing that is that comes up in various stories.
Yes. False wills.
Yeah.
Or which one is the most up to date?
Yeah. Oh, that was fun.
Or was the latest dated will signed after the person was mentally impaired? And
oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, competence to sign, witnesses. I don't know if some states require a notary as well. Who looks and says, "You signed it. The witnesses are here." And I put a stamp on it that says so.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing is that you have to know what happens if you don't leave a will. You also have to know what constitutes a legal will.
Mm-hmm.
Because my sister-in-law left a statement, sent us a letter, which was not signed. It may originally have been emailed, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
That she said, this is a statement of will. But it wasn't signed, it wasn't witnessed in any way, and it's not legally binding. So we can't go and say, this is what she meant to happen. Please help us make it happen. You have to know what constitutes. If you're going to leave a will, you need to know what constitutes a legal, effective will.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing. Other things that come up in mysteries and other stories, or just in real life, is, no, I'm not the oldest child. I'm just the one who spent, the last 50 years of her life caring for this person.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So how come I get nothing?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that so this injustice is an interesting thing, and sometimes you can have it gets me to the fact that the will of the person who has died is not necessarily just, right?
Oh yeah.
And But you can also have these situations where the deceased is trying to have control over what happens after they die. Like trying to control your children from beyond the grave using money.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So,
stay in the
putting
creepy
conditions
house.
on their inheritance, or right, it can be really really ugly. We had a situation. Since it's not my situation, I'm not going to go into it in depth. But one of my relatives who died had all kinds of very complicated instructions and conditions on the use of the money, and wanted to make sure that the people who were left behind behaved in a particular way if they wanted to get the money. And it became very rancorous for all kinds of people because of the manipulation, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, you're going to require me to have a relationship with X person if I want to have any chance at having your money. That kind of thing. And it doesn't necessarily reflect a knowledge of the nature of the relationships between the people who are left behind.
Yeah.
Right.
Because people are fallible, right? Even people who are moving on to the next world can be fallible, and there can be a lot of problems that result from that.
That's much more complicated than you have to spend a night in the creepy house or you don't get anything.
Yeah.
Or that Twilight Zone episode with the masks.
I'm glad I didn't see that one. Probably give me nightmares. But yes, go on.
Well, the guy had, children, and I guess son or daughter-in-law, and he felt that they all had serious personality flaws.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he handed out these masks, and had the executor hand out the masks. Gathered you all here today, and you have to wear the mask for 24 hours, or you get nothing. If you wear it, you get equal share, something like that. And so they put on their masks, which were hideous. And while they're wearing them, he's explaining that these masks reflect their inner characters. And they desperately want to remove them, and they can't. And of course, when the 24 hours are up, actually I don't remember exactly if it was the 24 hours are up or if they removed the masks beforehand. The face was molded to the shape of the mask so that it was always going to show what he considered to be a reflection of the character. And of course, it being fiction, that he was actually right about the characteristics.
Yes.
Yes,
but
so conveniently, he was actually right about these people, and they deserved what they got.
And I hadn't thought about that before as being, what if he's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Or what if they said, wait a minute, I really am like that. I need to change.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't. So that's an interesting point about fallibility.
Yeah.
There are also trusts. Yes, I died when you were 16. You can't have anything until you're 21 or 23 or
right.
have graduated from school or
yes.
Other conditions.
I was just going to say, I just thought of regents when you were talking about trusts.
Yeah.
And we know what trouble regents can get into.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Because that's a what if the heir that is being regented,
Mm-hmm.
what if the charge dies, who inherits then? If there is nobody else. Oops. Drowned in the bathwater.
Oh, strangely. Well, right. So what if the charge dies? You know, well, you have the Steward of Gondor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the kings just disappeared for a really, really long time. And gee, conveniently, we are ruling the town as though we were the kings of the town and inheriting and all that stuff, but we're inheriting as stewards, right?
Yeah.
Which I think may be similar potentially to, you know, I'm the friend or the child or the niece who has given up their whole life and spent the last 50 years caring for them, and you know, I'm not getting anything, getting any recognition, and that's what the steward is this whole family is taking care of a piece of not just property, but of a kingdom that they're not getting any credit. He comes back and they're out.
Yeah, right. That brings me to something that you don't see that often, which is, what about good stewards? I mean, you hear about bad stewards all the time.
Oh yeah.
Like, what if the steward is good and the heir is not so good?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, have you seen that a lot? I admit my reading is not as nearly as broad as it ought to be, but I don't think I can recall ever seeing that one.
I haven't, and that would be awkward because if you're a really good person, it's not as though you can dispose of a bad heir.
Yeah, that's a story right there.
I don't know. How would you handle that? Oh, sire, sorry, your presence is required in this other location. Sorry, no, they don't want to talk to an emissary. They really, really, really want to talk to you. So why don't you go off, spend a few months doing this distant political thing, show your face, and I'm sorry, you know, I know it's a real hardship on this, but we're willing to stick around and continue taking care of things here.
Yeah.
And how many heirs to the throne, how many kings would be willing to do that, and how long can you keep it up? and then if they happen in the process of doing this to get married and come up with an heir who's responsible and who could actually either be groomed to be a responsible person or who is somehow a responsible person, how do you fix it?
Yeah.
So that person becomes the ruler.
Yeah. I'm my brain's going, I gotta see if I can set this up somehow. I gotta write something.
Please do, because I got enough. That's
yeah, no, I like your little thought process there, Morgan. You can write it too. I mean, hey, there have been so few of these stories that there's clearly room for at least two.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. Or maybe I should make a note of that. Because I need things to be more complicated.
Well, in your situation, in your world that you were talking about, possibly interesting. Yeah, yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I have.
Thoughts are brewing. No, I always get a kick out of it when somebody gets a story idea during one of the hangouts. I'm always like, oh, cool. For somebody. I mean, the whole point of these is to give people ideas, right? And so presumably they're going off into the world of video YouTube and inspiring people, but but to have somebody actually come up with ideas during the hangout is really fun. So.
Actually, way back when you were talking about your barren world and the rulers, I got off on if the ruler is named when the ruler first takes office.
Yes.
Then what happens if the heir dies or becomes incompetent or something happens in the interim.
Well, so yeah, so if the heir dies, then you actually have to have a selection with the current ruler.
But what if they don't die but just become impaired?
Yeah, no, it's actually very problematic, isn't it? I have a situation coming up, not in the current book, but coming up, when the then was the eminence, that's the name of the ruler.
Yeah.
The eminence is actually thrown out for doing something terribly beyond the pale. Okay, and the heir takes his place, but he's not ready to go quietly. And he comes back and accuses the heir of being unfit because of genetic reasons.
Yeah.
And then all hell breaks loose.
Very good, very good.
Yeah. No. Yeah, because it is, so it is really problematic to try to get somebody out of a position of power because they're unfit, right? I mean, unless there is a specific legal process by which that's supposed to happen, and the person is actually willing to accept that legal process, which they may or may not be.
Yeah.
And my character definitely is not. He's not ready to accept anything. Yeah. But I mean it's not to no one's surprise, and I don't think I would be spoiling anything to say that the longer arc here is that the entire government falls, right? I mean, that's what you do, right? In stories like this, is you bring down the government. I remember I was first talking to my husband about it. I'm like, so honey, how do I bring down the government?
Let's not discuss this online, because
spoilers, no. but
I was thinking of no officer really, my browser history has to do with my writing, not actually assassinating anybody.
Well, exactly.
It's fiction. It's all made up.
Yeah. Well, it was funny, actually. No, it was funny about the discussion of how to bring down the government of Varan was that I had all these ideas about how it would be personally problematic. Like, I had the idea about the guy who was ruled unfit because he had committed a terrible act, whereas the other guy was unfit because he had these genetic issues and whatever. So I was all cool with that, and my husband was like, well, but if you actually want the government to calm down and not to have everything just keep rolling by virtue of momentum, you actually have to build structural problems into the entire society, which will cause things to break down, right? I mean, because if everything's running smoothly, you can have a minor problem in the inheritance, but the momentum of the society will carry it over, right? And so, like.
Yeah, if you're not challenging the existing theory of government, you're just challenging what specific individual that's embodied in.
Right.
Yeah, then you'll have that issue.
And so it led into a discussion about all kinds of things, but as we're getting close to the end, it's, I think, interesting to talk about the cultural inheritance of a society, right?
Yeah.
Because culture is something that we pass down, like our ways and rights and those kinds of things are, and so in the way that I think about culture and language, every time you are enacting it, you are also changing it. So every time you are speaking, you're potentially altering the way that people speak, right? And so cultural inheritance changes over time, the way that language changes over time. But then you kind of have to kind of sneak into that process and ask, well, you know, what causes those changes? And I think current American situation is actually really interesting because we are talking about how rights are interpreted, and that changes over time, and how, you know, how underrepresented or, you know, unjustly treated populations gain rights or lose rights over time, and that kind of stuff. Topic for another day, perhaps.
Yeah, I flashed on some of the Native American groups who object to archaeologists studying very, very old remains that they can't obviously document, oh, this is my great-great-grandfather.
Right.
Which would be one case, but...
Yeah. Yep.
And that's a cultural heritage issue.
Yeah.
That's the right to control those skeletons.
Yeah, because then you're looking at a clash of, you know, of societies and of cultures.
Yep.
And laws.
Yep.
Eventually as well.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Anyway, that got interesting. there's more there, but I can tell we're all kind of going. Rrr.
Yeah.
The wheels are now churning. We can't talk anymore.
Oh yeah.
Well, that happens on the best of these talks.
Yeah. Well, slightly, I guess a slightly different turn to bring in is at some point is not cultural inheritance so much as moving into another culture, sort of sideways. So if you marry into a culture, then you move into that space. So, you know, and you can think of, you know, someone converting to Judaism and then moving into that world, and maybe or maybe not, and that gets complicated, separating from the family that has not converted, from your family and the way you were brought up. And then you suddenly find yourself not just living in a Jewish household with the customs that have been in that family, but raising your children that way.
Yeah. Yep. Actually, how about next week for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna call it culture shock.
Okay.
But what we'll do is we'll take a look at it on a number of different levels. Hopefully on a personal level, like a spouse's culture, or smaller cultural changes, or larger, you know, like going to another country and that kind of thing. That could be something really fun to talk about. Yay! And many of us have been through it on some level. So, it'll be fun. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being here for me this week. And so we will meet again next week. And I think next week is the beginning of February.
I think so.
Wowie zowie. I need to make sure I know whether I have a guest lined up for the second week of February. But in the meantime, for the first week of February, because I never have guests in the first week of the month, for the first week of February, we will meet on Wednesday at 10 and talk about culture shock.
Great.
Thanks so much, you guys. Morgan, you were great today, and I hope that you got some of your burning issues out onto the video.
Yeah, I think I did. So
Awesome.
That helped a lot.
All right, you guys, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the broadcast.
Great.